In 1946, your blood stopped belonging to you and officially became the property of the Atomic Energy Commission. The government chose 18 people, labeling them with codes like CHI and R. To inject radiation directly into their veins. This was not medicine. It was a cold harvest of organs where doctors replaced your calcium with plutonium. They turned living people into glowing monuments to state madness, the results of which are still hidden under the secret stamp. In 1945, a man walked into a California hospital with a simple stomach ulcer and left as a radioactive asset for the United States government. He didn't know he had been chosen. He didn't know that his blood was now the property of the Manhattan Project. The world was celebrating the end of the war, but in the shadows of the medical establishment, a new kind of combat was starting. The target was not a foreign enemy. The target was the unsuspecting patient in bed number 4. They were looking for the limits of human decay. By the end of this journey, you will see the declassified ledgers of the secret Plutonium 18. You will discover the names of the doctors who traded their oaths for atomic data. And you will see why the government turned hospital wards into biological disposal sites. The project was born from a terrifying necessity. The architects of the atomic bomb realized that their workers were breathing in a substance that didn't exist in nature. They had no idea what plutonium did to a living heart. They needed a map of the destruction. But they couldn't test it on their elite scientists. They needed people they considered expendable. They turned to the public health system to find their human dosimeters. They were looking for the terminally ill, the poor, and those who wouldn't ask questions. The man in California was labeled CAL1. That was his new name in the secret files. Doctors injected him with a massive dose of plutonium-239. It was enough to kill a laboratory animal in days, but they wanted to see how long a man could suffer. But here is the most disturbing part of the protocol. Albert Stevens, or Cal-1, didn't actually have terminal cancer. The doctors had misdiagnosed him. He was a healthy man who had just been handed a death sentence by his own government for the sake of a spreadsheet. Imagine waking up from a routine procedure, feeling the coldness in your veins, while a man in a white coat watches you with a stopwatch. To the Manhattan Project, you weren't a patient. You were a biological clock. They were measuring the seconds of your survival. The air in the ward felt heavy with the scent of ozone. The doctors monitored Albert's every movement with a clinical intensity. They weren't looking for a cure. They were looking for a baseline of failure. Every shiver was a valuable data point for the Cold War. Wait, it gets even more disturbing. The declassified memos show that the military was obsessed with biological half-lives. They wanted to know if the radiation would stay in the bones or move to the brain. They were farming the agony of a father to fuel an empire. The transition from medical care to human harvest happened in total silence. The agency realized that if they controlled the hospital, they controlled the most intimate data on the planet. They were building a world of biological ghosts in 1946. The countdown to the total domination of the bloodstream had begun. The injections were being expanded to other cities. The targets were selected from the ranks of the forgotten, and the world was about to find out that the atomic age was built on a foundation of lies. The gateway to the modern era of genetic tracking was opening in a clinic in Chicago. The scientists thought they were just measuring fallout, but the archives reveal that they were creating the first database of human biological vulnerability. The harvest was moving. The research was led by Dr. Joseph Hamilton. He was a pioneer in nuclear medicine who believed that the individual was a secondary concern to the state. He saw the Plutonium 18 as a technical requirement for the survival of the United States of America. In 1946, the project moved to the University of Chicago and the University of Rochester. They began injecting more subjects. The code names were clinical: CHI-1, CHI-2, RO-1. The human identity was being deleted and replaced by a location code. The documents show that one of the subjects was a 4-year-old boy. He was being treated for a rare blood disorder. The doctors saw an opportunity. They injected him with the radioactive poison and then spent months collecting his biological waste for analysis. But the physical toll was only half the story. The psychological pressure was designed to keep the families from asking questions. They were told the special treatments were part of an advanced government program to save their children. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. Then came the middle video revelation. The declassified files revealed that the doctors were also testing the bone-seeking properties of the toxin. They wanted to know if the plutonium would replace the calcium in the skeleton. They were turning children into living statues. The subjects were monitored for decades. Even when they tried to leave the hospital, the government found them. They had agents posing as social workers to ensure the data was never interrupted. The identity factory was now a permanent surveillance loop in 1950. But wait, it gets even more industrial. The records mention a disposal ledger, where the value of each autopsy was tracked. The military was literally paying for the right to cut open the victims before they had even stopped breathing. The state was owning the body. The scientists were obsessed with the idea of total accumulation. They wanted to know if the radiation could be passed through the bloodline. They were trying to rewrite the human DNA in a basement in 1952. They were building the first radioactive army. But the subjects were starting to decay in horrific ways. Their teeth began to fall out. Their bones became as brittle as glass. One woman reported that her skin felt like it was being scorched from the inside by an invisible fire. The bad blood was showing its face. One viewer of the files later noted that the signal 0 frequency was first identified during these clinical trials. They found that the radiation changed the brain's receptivity to external signals. They were building the global antenna for the mind in the Maryland woods. The tension inside the Atomic Energy Commission was rising. Some officials realized that the Plutonium 18 was a massive liability. They decided to move the research into the private sector to ensure the secret stayed buried in the archives for another 50 years. The contrast between the peaceful atom propaganda and the reality of the injection files is bone-chilling. The government was building a future of clean energy while they were poisoning the most vulnerable members of society. They were playing both sides of the soul. The countdown to the modern era of digital dosimeters had begun. The human filters of Chicago were being replaced by the neural networks of today. The military realized that an isotope is effective, but a digital signal is absolute. The harvest was moving home. By 1960, the bone harvest had become a permanent infrastructure. The government needed more than just 18 subjects. They needed a global sample size. They began secretly collecting tissues from thousands of people across the country, without consent. The declassified reports show that they targeted the bodies of deceased infants. They were looking for clean calcium that had been exposed to the first nuclear tests. They called it Project Sunshine. The name was a mask for a global grave-robbing operation. But here is the twist. The doctors who performed the autopsies were often the same men who had signed the Plutonium 18 checks. They were a closed circle of experts who viewed the human skeleton as an industrial resource. The machinery of betrayal was global. They wanted to see if the signal of the radioactive blood was still active in the next generation. They were looking for the resilient assets to serve as the new elite in the event of a total nuclear exchange. The Adam and Eve protocol was now a biological reality. The project leaders were now working on Phase 5. This was the plan to use the Montauk frequency to activate the radioactive markers in the blood of the population. They were trying to create a biological remote control for the entire world in 1965. They envisioned a world where a heart attack could be triggered by a satellite signal interacting with the isotopes in your blood. It was the ultimate dream of total social and biological management. The mighty Wurlitzer was now playing a tune in your very cells. But the survivors of the original injections were still alive, walking the streets as biological ghosts. Albert Stevens lived for 20 years with the highest dose of radiation ever recorded in a human being. The doctors were stunned by his resilience. They wanted to know his secret. They took more samples. They tracked his children. They realized that he was a grade A result for the identity factory. He was the prototype for the connected citizen who could survive the coming digital and nuclear storms. Wait, it gets even more disturbing. The declassified files show that the CIA shared the plutonium data with the same Japanese scientists from Unit 731. The devil's bargain was now being used to refine the radioactive blood protocols in Virginia. The expertise of the Harbin monsters was used to map the destruction of the human liver and spleen. The human filters of America were being analyzed by the same minds that had frozen children in Manchuria. The circle of agony was absolute and permanent. In 1973, during the Great Purge, the project leaders attempted to destroy the Plutonium 18 files. They wanted to wipe the memory of the injections from the face of the earth. But they missed a small box of memos in a basement in Tennessee. Those memos were a ticking time bomb for the intelligence community. They contained the signatures of the men who had authorized the clinical murder of 18 citizens. The truth was starting to glow in the dark of the archives. The end was arriving. The secret of 1945 stayed hidden for 49 long years. But in 1994, the silence was finally shattered by a journalist named Eileen Wellsome. She found the code names in a dusty corner of a library. She began to find the faces. The world finally saw the Plutonium 18 in the light of day. The reaction was an explosion of national fury. The Secretary of Energy, Hazel O'Leary, made a historic decision to open the vaults. She saw the identity factory for what it truly was, a crime. The declassified documents show that the government had lied to the families for 5 decades. They had told them the subjects died of natural causes, while they were secretly harvesting their organs for the bone lab. The betrayal was total and absolute. President Bill Clinton was forced to issue an official apology in 1995. He stood before the cameras and admitted that the United States had treated its own citizens as laboratory rats. It was a moment of national shame that could not be erased. But the moral reset was already in motion. The government offered the survivors a settlement of $6 million. It was a payment for silence. They wanted the radioactive blood files to be closed before the public looked at the modern connection. The settlement did not include an admission of legal guilt. The authorities realized that if they admitted the crime, the Project Gabriel infrastructure would be compromised. They paid the money to save the system, not the victims. It was a final insult. But the most shocking part of the investigation was what the scientists found in the survivors' DNA. The plutonium hadn't just destroyed their bones, it had etched a permanent mark into their genetic code. The experiment had moved from the body to the soul. They realized that the Plutonium 18 were just the Phase 1 assets for a much larger project. The data from the 1940s was being used to calibrate the latest generation of digital health monitoring systems in 2026. The mighty Wurlitzer of the media was used to turn the scandal into a historical tragedy. They wanted us to believe that this could never happen today. But the declassified trail leads directly to your own smartphone and your own medical file. The transition from the needle to the algorithm was complete. The invisible editor was no longer a man in a lab. It is the AI that monitors your biological markers in real time. The identity factory has achieved total mental and physical integration. The declassified memos suggest that the final harvest of human health data was scheduled for the mid-20s. They were waiting for a specific technological breakthrough that would allow them to activate the signal on a global scale. We are in the loop. The secret was never about a bomb. It was about the realization that history is a circle of betrayal. We are the cargo in a train that was fueled by the screams of 1945. And the train has reached the final platform in the dark of the night. The descendants of the Plutonium 18 are still being monitored today. They carry the radioactive legacy in their blood. By the 2020s, the government realized that they had created a new species of human, the permanent subject. Wait until you see the secret monitoring reports from 2024. They show that the DNA of these families is still being shared with private pharmaceutical laboratories. They are looking for the genetic key to eternal biological loyalty to the state. They want to see if the radioactive signal is still active in the third generation. They are looking for the resilient assets to serve as the new guardians for Project Gabriel. The Adam and Eve protocol is being applied to your own family tree. But the trauma was also permanent. Survivors reported feeling a vibration in the blood whenever they were near a military installation. The CIA files suggest that these weren't just hallucinations. They were echoes of the original 1945 signal. The project had successfully fused atomic torture with digital engineering. The subjects of Chicago were the prototypes for the connected citizen, a person who is always receiving a signal zero from the state through their own bloodstream. But here is the most heartbreaking part. The families of the victims were never told the full truth about why their children were being tracked. They were told it was for public safety. The lie is the operating system for the modern world of surveillance. By the 21st century, the declassified secret was starting to leak into your digital health records. Tech giants were using the results of mass exposure to keep you engaged. The methods of the Bone Lab are now the OS for your reality. The transition was total. The invisible editor is no longer a man in Langley. It is the algorithm that predicts your immune response before you feel a symptom. The hospital is no longer a building. It is the digital network that tracks your every breath. The declassified memos suggest that the final harvest of human perception was scheduled for the mid-20s. They were waiting for a specific technological breakthrough that would allow them to sync the entire global population to a single frequency. We are living in that breakthrough right now. The identity factory has moved from the Maryland woods into the cloud. Your ability to distinguish between a fact and a script is being monitored by the same agencies that planned the radioactive blood. The documents they tried to burn are finally screaming in your pocket, and the truth they tell is about to dismantle the history of the human race. The kidnapping of the soul was the primary objective, and today they have more souls than they can count. As you close this video, ask yourself one question. How much of your health is actually yours? How many of your reactions were programmed into your mind by a man in a white coat 80 years ago? The search for the human trigger has reached your own screen. Today, in 2026, the Plutonium 18 are a memory, but the signal 0 is stronger than ever. The declassified charts show that the data from the 1940s injections is the foundation for the modern world of cognitive bio-warfare. We have built a civilization on the silence of the human filters. Every time you check your heart rate on a smartwatch, you are reacting to a frequency that was calibrated in 1945. The identity factory has achieved total mental integration. But there is one more thing you need to consider. The original Manhattan Project report mentioned a final sync. It was a biological marker that only appears in the blood of those who have been reset. The military believed this marker was the key to total peace. Recent leaks from the European Security Archives suggest that this final sync has been found. It is being used to sort the global population into viewers and subjects. The empathy-free elite from Montauk are using the plutonium data to build their world. The train to the stars has left the station, and the biological ghosts are the cargo. The cargo is the truth. But the question is, are you ready to see the face behind the mask? The final stop is here, and the declassified history is about to dismantle your world. Everything we have uncovered points to a single, terrifying conclusion. The war that started in the clinics of Chicago never ended. It just went under your skin. It became your perception. It became your future. The factory is still running in the light. The documents they tried to burn are finally screaming in your smartphone. And the truth they tell is about to dismantle the history of the human race. The kidnapping of the soul was the primary objective, and today they have more souls than they can count. As you close this video, ask yourself one question. How much of your reality is actually yours? How many of your choices were programmed into your mind by a man in a dark room 80 years ago? The search for the human trigger has reached your own screen. But wait, there is one more thing. The agency always kept a backup. Even as they erased the Stargate files, they kept the most successful viewers for a rainy day. And the world today is looking very stormy indeed. The signal is active again right now. The next file is already starting to open. It involves a facility that's linking directly to the modern power structure. A project so dark, it makes the psychic spies look like a simple error. The final stop is arriving. The declassified file is open for the world. This was only the beginning of the secret psychological race, and it is certainly not the last time they will try to play God with your consciousness. Because once you start looking into the shadows of your own mind, you realize that the shadows are also looking back. They have been watching you much longer than you think, since 1951, since 1945, since you started this video. The identity factory is closed, but the blood harvest is eternal. The truth is arriving at the platform.